I call to order the City of Bloomington Board of Zoning Appeals for August the 24th, 2023. Roll call, please.
Mallard.
Here.
Burrell. Here. Farrell. Here. Clapper.
Here. Okay, we do have minutes to approve from our May meeting, but we are going to wait until September once everybody's had an opportunity to review them. And we will approve those minutes in September. Okay, the petitions this evening, well, actually, reports, resolutions, and communications? Nothing? Okay. So the petitions, we have one petition which is continued to our September meeting, and that is AA-17-22, Joe Kemp Construction, LLC, and Blackwell Construction, Inc. And on this evening's docket, we have 6 petitions. They are V-18-23, IU Health, V-19-23, Caritas Indiana, LLC, CU/V-20-23, Daniel Weddle, V-21-23, Community Kitchen of Monroe County, V-22-23, True Storage, LLC, and V-24-23, David Hayes. So I think we are ready for our first petition. That is V-18-23, IU Health. Staff report, please.
Thank you, everybody. As mentioned, the first petition tonight is for IU Health. This is for a property that they own at 727 West 2nd Street. The petitioners are here tonight to request a variance from parking standards in order to allow for parking in the front parking setback and to allow back out parking on an alley. They're also requesting a variance from the required sidewalk and tree plot width for this property. So this is located, as I mentioned, at 727 West 2nd Street. This has been developed with an office building owned by or used by IU Health. It's owned by the Monroe County Community School Corporation. So IU Health uses this for office as well as treatment areas. And so they are looking to redo the parking that is on the south side of the site. The property spans from 2nd Street to 1st Street. The building that is on the north side of the site is a notable building. So it's a historic rating, and then parking has been developed off of the south side of the site that is accessed mostly from 1st Street. There is an alley that connects 2nd Street to 1st Street that runs along the east side of the site that does have some parking that you can see here in this aerial. That is along the alley. So that is the area that they are requesting to keep the parking spaces in. So they would be redoing all of the parking to redo this for a new parking area. And as part of that, they would have to come into compliance with various aspects of the zoning code since the parking is being completely removed. So they are requesting a variance, as I mentioned, from the front parking setback in order to allow parking to be between the building and 1st Street. So that is one of the variances. The second variance that they are requesting, as I mentioned, was to allow for the parking to remain off of the alley. The zoning code does allow for back out parking off of an alley, but only for lots that are 20,000 square feet or less. And this property is almost an acre and a half, I believe. So it is over the size that is allowed for back out parking off of the alley. So this is certainly important, as the board may or may not be aware. This is within and immediately adjacent to the redevelopment site for the hospital. So we have lots of plans for redevelopment of this entire area, as the hospital and a lot of the supporting structures and parking have been removed to allow for redevelopment. Within the Transportation and Redevelopment and Overlay District that governs the hospital, the use of alleys within the hospital area has been highly encouraged and promoted, and all access is required to come off of those alleys for driveways. So we want to keep those free and clear from situations that create traffic problems with traffic movement. The back out parking is certainly an issue here along that alley as we look to redevelop this entire hospital site. And then also, as I mentioned, with the redevelopment here of the parking area, it does trigger limited compliance because they are expanding the area for parking that is currently in the back of their property. So the limited compliance standards would require them to install pedestrian improvements along both frontages. The sidewalk along First Street is in functional condition, so no changes would be required to that. However, the sidewalk along Second Street is not in functional condition. It's in a very bad state of disrepair. So that would be required to be improved with the sidewalk and tree plant as required with the transportation plan. However, the petitioners are requesting a variance from the required sidewalk and tree plot width to not require the full sidewalk width that would be required. A 10-foot sidewalk and 8-foot tree plot would be required along Second Street. And so the petitioner is requesting the variance to allow for the 5-foot sidewalk and 5-foot tree plot to remain along Second Street. So moving through this, obviously, there are various findings that we have to make for the various variances that are being requested. In regards to the parking setback, the site is certainly unique in that it has frontage along both streets and has been developed with the building on the north side of the site. It is a historic building, as I mentioned. And so not granting the variance would require a completely new building to be constructed on the south side of the site. So we do not find that there are any injuries to the public health, safety, morals, or general welfare of the community by allowing the parking to remain where it is. There are no known adverse impacts or injuries to the public health that we have noted with the location of the existing parking. So we don't find any negative findings in that regard. The back out parking, as I mentioned, with the redevelopment of the hospital site, we are looking to utilize the alleys for access. So there'll be a lot more traffic generated off of those alleys. So having back out parking does create a hazardous situation in that regard. And so we do feel that there are negative impacts here to the public health and safety, more importantly, as a result of allowing the back out parking to remain. And likewise with the sidewalk and tree plant width, we do find that there would be injuries to the public health and safety as it would not require or would not allow for the proper facilities to be installed here to match the improvements that the city is doing. As part of the redevelopment of the hospital site, we are also committed to doing several improvements along Second Street, including widening the street, improving the tree plot and sidewalk system. So not requiring the property to come into compliance along Second Street and to sync up with our improvements would have adverse impacts. Real quickly on that note, we did include a condition of approval, recommending that the city will work with the petitioners to install the improvements along Second Street. But in regards to the variance findings themselves, we don't find that there's anything unique along this property that doesn't allow them to install the sidewalk and tree plot width. But I'll talk about that in just a second with the practical difficulty findings. In regards to the use and value of the area adjacent to the property, again, we don't find any adverse impacts for allowing the parking to remain in the parking setback area between the building and First Street. As I noted, it has existed in this condition for a long time with no known adverse impacts on the use and value. So we do not find any adverse impacts in that regard. Again, with the back out parking on the alley, we do find some adverse impacts on the use and value adjacent to the properties. As I mentioned, with the increased traffic that is expected along the alley as in regards to the redevelopment of the hospital site, we want to minimize possible conflict with turning movements along the alley. So we do find adverse impact with that regard. And we do also find adverse impacts on the use and value of adjacent properties by not requiring the sidewalk and tree plot width, as it would create a situation that is not consistent with the city's planned improvements along this corridor that I mentioned briefly. In regards to practical difficulties in the use of the property, and that those are peculiar to the property, In regard to the parking setback, we do find that there are practical difficulties in the use of the property, in that it would not allow for any parking to be installed on the site, given where the existing building is located and the presence of two streets on the north and south end of the property. So the double frontage here, along with the location of the historic building, does create a practical difficulty here with the use of the property and placing any parking on that. In regards to the back out alley parking, the intent of the 20,000 square foot limitation on the size of a property was to recognize that smaller properties have greater difficulties oftentimes in providing parking within the interior of the site. As I mentioned, this site is very large in size. There is an internal parking area that allows for turning movements to occur within the site. So we do not find that there is any difficulty with meeting the requirements of the zoning code and not allowing for the back out parking. And then again, with the sidewalk and tree plot width, we do not find that the strict application of the terms of the UDO would result in practical difficulties in the use of the property, in that there is nothing along the front of the property that prevents them from installing the sidewalk and tree plot width. We certainly do recognize that there is a retaining wall along the front. However, that is not a historic wall in any regards. It does not contribute to the historic rating of the house or the structure. So there would be no negative impacts by moving the sidewalk and the tree plot width back to the required separation standards and width standards. So we do not find that there are any practical difficulties of the use of the property that warrant the justification for a variance from the sidewalk and tree plot width. We are recommending that the Board of Zoning Appeals adopt the proposed findings and approve the variance to allow parking within the front parking setback, but deny the variance for back out alley parking and reduce sidewalk and tree plot width, with the two conditions that are listed in staff's report. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Petitioner's representative? If you could just step to the podium and state your name.
I am Gabe and Associates, and I'm representing IU Health tonight.
Great. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
You have up to 20 minutes to state your case.
IU Health, it was interested in producing some more parking since there was a large loss of parking over there with the elimination of the current, or the hospital in that location. So they had to kind of readjust how the parking was going to look, to have ability to park everyone that is going to use this existing Hunter School that, as Eric mentioned, is historic, and the current door locations of this building are going to remain in place. There's current offices and different services that are offered to the community for IU Health in this building. And so there was a variety of variances needed in order to make this functional, to make it work, to park everyone that's still using this building. So it sounded like the first variance of parking at the rear in front of First Street was something that the city was recommending approval on. The other two, I wanted to state a little more case of why. Why would we need that, and why would it be something that the project would benefit from as we move forward? The first one of having that, there's an existing strip of parking. I'm sure many of you have been over to that building or have used that building many times. There's an existing strip of parking that is on the east side of that building currently. There is a front door in that location, and right now the majority of the accessible parking is in that location. We're amenable to even making that accessible parking only. There's a current barrier between the alley and that accessible parking that exists, so it's I get the letter of the law is that it may appear have look of back out parking in the alley, but we'd be willing to make improvements to improve even the barrier that's there. So right now, you're not truly backing out into an alley. You're backing out into a parking drive area, and the hospital certainly could put in some kind of new accessible spaces that are more on the south side of the building. But if you've ever been, not able to walk very far, that's just a farther walk to get to that front door and get into the office that you need to. So that's right now where they have a front door, where they have that accessible parking. So that's why we're asking for that one. The only thing about the width of the sidewalk that we're kind of looking at is we have a peculiar situation on that north side of the building where we have an existing wall mixed with large, I believe they're oak trees that are sitting there. They're maple, okay, thank you. Maple trees that have been there, they look like maybe 40 to 50-year-old trees. So if you were going to expand and move that wall back, you'd be eliminating those trees. So that one is, it's not out of the possibility, but that's why we were asking for that as well, because it's, part of, in our opinion, a little bit of the historic nature of that building and what it is now. But that's all I wanted to add. I'd be happy to answer any questions, though.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we are to the board for questions. Anybody want to start? No? Any questions?
My question is for staff. So if they are to put the 10-foot sidewalk on the north end of the property, do they have to remove all the trees and the retaining wall?
So real quickly, I'll just share, if I can, Google Street View. Hold on a second. So this is the area that is being shown there along the front. So the sidewalk, in order to install what is required, it would need to move back about 8 feet. So that would be probably approximately where I believe this is gravel as shown. The wall would need to be moved back to that area. So with that being said, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, the city will be doing improvements along here. And so we are willing to work with the petitioner to come up with a plan and agreement to work with them and the city to install the improvements along here. However, in and of itself, looking at the variance, there's nothing that requires those trees and would necessarily definitely impact them if the retaining wall is moved back 8 feet in order to install the sidewalk and tree plot to the required width. So while the trees may be impacted, as I mentioned, they're not a requirement. They can certainly plant new trees, but it's also not necessarily a given that, moving the wall back 8 feet is going to kill them. So if that helps answer your question.
Yes.
I'll just kind of follow up.
Yes.
Eric, I have a question. Was a determinate sidewalk variance discussed at all?
Well, so that's, that would be up for the petitioners. They opted to file for a variance from this width. We obviously cannot tell people what to file. They make the choice of what to file for, and then we process that accordingly.
Okay. So the way that this second condition is written, it says that the petitioner shall work with the city to either dedicate the appropriate right-of-way to be improved by the city project or install improvements. So it sounds like they may not have to do any work.
Yes, so pending the results of a certified survey showing where the right-of-way line is at the time that this was written, we weren't sure if the actual property line was at the back of the sidewalk or back of the retaining wall or where that was. It appears that the right-of-way line or their property line might be further back, and so we would not need additional right-of-way to install the city's improvements. But we're working to verify that. So in essence, as I mentioned, as long as they work with us to either dedicate the right-of-way that we need for the city's project, which, they may not even need to do if the property line is where they claim that it might be. Or, at the worst case, they would have to install the improvements consistent with what we would be doing.
Okay. Okay, and then I have a question for Mr. Butler. If you could come to the podium. About the parking on the east side, wouldn't it be possible to rotate the parking spaces 90 degrees so that you could have several that kind of dock to the north and then several that dock to the south? Because I understand the need for wanting to maintain that entry as an accessible point. Wouldn't that allow for accessible parking to remain there and not back out into the alley?
It would not allow for as many as are there now.
But it could be an alternative.
I would also like Eric's input on that, if that would be deemed a direct, it sounded like from his report, he also was trying to eliminate some of the access points. And so if that could be amenable to IU Health as well, some kind of compromise so that there would be something that somebody in a wheelchair could have a direct access to that door location.
Could you address that, Eric, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So far in our interpretation or application of the back out parking, we have basically said, that parking spaces cannot directly access the alley, whether it's angled or parallel or 90 degrees, the use of parking spots directly off of an alley would not be allowed. So parking would all have to be contained in sight. So there is a provision in the parking that says, all parking movements, must be accommodated on site, so as to not, have back out parking or, that would meet setbacks. So any parking spaces directly off the alley here wouldn't meet setbacks and wouldn't be allowed.
So what's the setback there for parking?
7 feet.
So they would have to have sort of a return, like a bump out, and then they could have parking within that. You could have an access point off the alley.
Yes, access points from an alley are not governed in terms of the number limitation. Whereas on streets, there is a limitation of how many drive cuts. There is not that same limitation on an alley. So yes, if it met the 7-foot setbacks, I think that could be allowed. Yeah.
I don't know if that allows enough space for, maybe a couple of parking spaces, or you would want an, the aisle, access aisle in between. But
I think that would meet the nature of what they're looking for to keep that access so that somebody wouldn't have to walk as far. It is, you're probably talking about another 20 to 25 feet walking distance to that door from the alternate location that we're looking at for. If you would bring up the map, it shows some extra ADA parking spaces, but it's just a little bit longer of a walk, that's all it is. So something like that I think would work out if.
And just a clarification, the way that that parking lays out now, that island is actually in the alley, the sort of the island, that kind of sandbar sort of, yeah, okay. So that space is kind of belongs.
So I'll just kind of say from the city's perspective, we do not want obstructions within the alley. We're working to utilize that alley to the maximum extent possible. So we don't want any islands or any encroachments or any obstructions within the alley itself.
So with this proposal, that would go away, correct? Along with this project, that kind of concrete island would disappear.
Yeah, that was the area I was talking about before. So yes, it is right in the middle of the alley, so that would be eliminated
Okay.
per se. Yep,
Okay.
that's right.
Anybody else have questions? Questions? I do have some questions about the trees, Eric, because they're really nice specimen trees, and they're mature, and it's, I know that the city, when there are street designs or redesigns, that mature trees are often worked around. And I don't know if these would qualify, but it seems kind of a shame since this is going to be sort of a piecemeal kind of thing, and I don't know if there's a time frame for the improvements yet of Second Street, but I just wanted to hear a little bit more about how other projects take into account sort of those types of natural, mature trees.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the UDO does give some discretion to the planning director, to allow some minor alterations to pedestrian facilities or tree plot width to accommodate any unique situations that might arise. So that, there's always a little bit of flexibility at that level. With this request, we're simply evaluating this from a variance perspective of, they just don't want to meet the standards. So evaluating it from a peculiar condition standpoint, there's nothing about the property that doesn't allow them, to move the wall and the sidewalk back. Yes, there might be, a minor impact to the tree that is arguable whether or not it will have any major impacts to the tree. But yes, there is at a staff level always the ability to have minor modifications or adjustments to required improvements to accommodate unique situations on the ground. So, if it was a matter of, rather than a 8-foot tree plot width, we approve a 7-foot or a 6.5 foot, there's always that path for discussion. But in terms of not requiring full compliance from a variance perspective, that's where, we were not able to make findings for.
Okay, so if we were interested in seeing that street design, like looked at comprehensively and holistically, so this is part of what's happening, to the east and to the west, we could deny this variance, and we could make a recommendation that they come back for determinate sidewalk variance, so that could kind of be worked out at the time when that design's happening.
Well, I mean, I guess I would caution against advising a client to apply for, or advising
Okay.
somebody to apply for a variance.
Okay,
As I mentioned there, we're always willing to work with somebody, and in this specific situation, with the condition of approval, we've already kind of said, that we expect that we'll be able to accommodate their improvements, assuming that we've got enough right of way. If we need a foot or two of right of way for some reason, and they're able to dedicate that, we will do the improvements along this property.
okay. But you don't have any concern that doing this block ahead of everything else will set things out of sorts, or there might be something done that, we just always try not to do work before, the whole thing is looked at, and just kind of out of order.
Yeah, so we do have a design. Right now, I talking to engineering staff earlier today, we're still at like a 70% level, of what it will look like along Second Street. But, at this time, it appears that, we'll probably be able to do a lot of the work within the existing right of way. As I mentioned, there might be a foot or two needed, depending on where their final survey kind of lays things out. But it appears that we have every reason to believe that we'll be able to do what the city is envisioning along the entire corridor, along this property.
Okay. I had no idea it was that eminent, that immediate.
Well, it's still, 2025 is the year that we will most likely begin those improvements. And as I mentioned, the design is at kind of a 70% phase right now.
Okay, so it's been looked at pretty closely at this point.
Yes.
Okay, great. Anybody else? Okay, then we are to the public for comment. Is there anybody here who would like to speak to this petition?
If you'd like to speak, you can raise your hand
Yes.
or send a message to the host.
Thank you. Is that you or me? Okay. Anybody? Okay, seeing no one here, we are back to the petitioner, who I'm sure has a lot of time remaining, if you have any additional comments you would like to make.
I'll just add, we are expecting to provide that full certified survey to the city as well, and we're happy to do that. And it does appear that the right-of-way line is enough needed for this city project. I just want to make everyone aware of that situation that you're talking about with the trees. Hopefully that can be designed around if the petition, or if the petition for that particular variance is turned down.
Okay. Okay, we are back to the board for action. I will entertain a motion.
So it sounds like they're going, IU Health is going to build this into their design.
Speaking to the,
Oh.
yeah, you have a question?
Like, I guess I
A
just have a question
clarification?
for us.
Okay,
Yeah.
sure.
So IU Health is going to build around this site, like potentially. They're gonna, like when they do Hopewell, it's all gonna kind of come together? That's what it sounded like Eric was saying.
So Eric, do you want to talk a little bit about this site in context with the larger Hopewell project?
So, right now we are still, I believe, evaluating prospective development projects for the overall Hopewell development. Nothing has been formally submitted for approval other than a platting process to subdivide properties and plat some internal alleys and streets. So I believe that's, kind of the extent of where we are in reviewing actual plans.
But the back of this lot was regraded as part of the demolition, and that's why it's all green now. Yeah. But that is owned by, IU Health is maintaining ownership of this lot.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Because it's a little weird when you go up there and you see that, how
Yeah.
it's fenced and everything. Okay, did we have a,
Make a motion for V-18-23. The Board of Zoning Appeals adopt the proposed findings and approve the variance to allow parking within the front parking setback and deny the variances for back out alley parking and reduce sidewalk and tree lot width with the following conditions. A sidewalk connection from First Street to the building is required. Number 2, the petitioner shall work with the city engineering department to either dedicate appropriate right-of-way to be improved with the city project or to install improvements along the Second Street frontage consistent with the city improvements.
do I have a second? Okay, discussion? Any comments? I just would say that I really hope that those trees can be maintained and whatever adjustments need to be made so that they can remain healthy and beautiful as they sit there lording over Second Street. Great, great. So I think we're ready for a vote.
Yes.
Farrell,
Yes.
Clapper,
Yes.
Ballard.
Okay. Thank you very much. One yes and 2 no's. Okay, have a good evening. Okay, I am going to be recusing myself for the next case, and Flavia is going to take over the meeting.
Our second petition is case number V-19-23, Caritas Indiana LLC is the petitioner. Staff, please give us the report.
Thank you. As mentioned, this is a request from Adam Jackson as part of Caritas Indiana LLC for a property at 1420 West Kirkwood Avenue. The petitioner is here tonight to request a variance from the architecture standards to allow for the construction of an 8-unit multifamily building in the residential high-density multifamily zoning district. So this site has been to the Board of Zoning Appeals a few times for a variance from side yard, buffer yard requirements, as well as for previous variance from architectural standards. So this is located at the west end of Kirkwood Avenue. It is zoned RH, residential high density. So it's a somewhat small site. about a quarter of an acre at best, about 7,000 square feet, actually, sorry. And the petitioner is looking to redevelop the site. Currently or previously had one house on it as well as a garage or two. And so the petitioner received approval, site plan approval, to allow for it to be developed with a new multifamily development. It would have 4 buildings on there that would be 2-story. There is no parking that is required for this use. However, they are providing parking along both street frontages in form of parallel spaces. There would be street trees installed as well as landscaping throughout the property. So the property is only about 50 feet wide. And so the width of the property has created several difficulties in the redevelopment of it, with the frontages on both sides that require a 15-foot setback, as well as the side yard setbacks to the north and the east, that severely limit the amount of developable and buildable area on the property. So the petitioner is here tonight to request a variance from the architectural standards that are in relation to the difficulties associated with the small size of the lot. So the zoning code requires a certain amount of variation within features, change in building height, variation in terms of modulation. So the petitioner has incorporated defined breaks in the building, in the height of the building. As you can see here, there is a separation between the 2 northern and southern buildings by a staircase that creates the visual separation that is desired and looked to be accomplished through these architectural standards. They have included a 2-foot separation height between the 2 buildings. Again, that's something that was called out in the UDO, but they aren't able to incorporate the amount of windows along the ground floor. And again, this is just due to the small size of the units, which is related to the small size of the building, which is directly related to the narrow width of the lot. So all of these things have really kind of contributed to making it very difficult to develop the site in terms of meeting all of our architectural requirements. But the petitioner has incorporated all of the elements. They're just not able to have full compliance with all of the standards along all 4 sides. And so this is something that we have obviously evaluated for the various findings. We do not find that there will be any injuries to the public health, safety, and morals or general welfare. As a result, this is not a variance from any safety standards or any building code issues. So there's no impacts in that regard. We do not find any adverse impacts to the use and value of the surrounding properties. This will meet all building code standards. The reduction in the change in the height and modulation and the amount of ground floor windows will not impact any of the adjacent properties or uses. And lastly, the practical difficulties, as we mentioned, are tied directly to the narrow width of the lot. The amount of buildable area and width only allows for a 25-foot wide building. The required modulation further takes away from that amount of buildable area and would require almost 3.5 feet of modulation on the side. So that reduces the interior width even more. So the granting of the variance will relieve those practical difficulties by allowing the property to be developed in a very modest way in keeping with the multifamily zoning. The petitioner is working to provide affordable housing, which furthers, a lot of the goals of the comprehensive plan. So we are recommending approval of the variance with the 2 conditions that are listed in staff's report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Eric. May the petitioner representative come forward, please. Please state your name.
Hi, I'm Dawn Gray with Spring Point Architects.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. You have 20 minutes.
I would like to thank the board for considering the variances this evening and Eric for the staff report. I really don't have anything else to add. I think it was well explained. This site is challenging just because of the nature of the size of it and the proportions. So in an effort to create a reasonable building that is affordable and able to be built in a reasonable way, we're asking for this variance. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Now we're up to the board, if you have any questions, either to staff or the petitioner. No questions? No questions? So then we're now up to the public, if they have any comments or questions.
If you're on Zoom, feel free to raise your virtual hand or send a message to the host, Jacqueline Scanlon, and we can let you speak here.
Nothing on from the public. Do you have any comments from the board? Any comments? Or are we ready for a motion?
I'll just say I'm really excited for this project. Even the first time when it came through, I like the mission of the group. I think one of the owners kind of spoke and shared where they were coming from, trying to support some voucher housing, which I think is much needed. So I think this is a great site. The changes going from 4 to 2 stories, I think also maybe fits in a little bit better with the neighborhood, considering that it's basically single family. So I'm glad to see this move forward.
Any comments? I'm ready for a motion then.
Okay, I'll move to approve case number V-19-23 and adopt the proposed findings and approve with the following conditions. 1, site plan approval is required prior to issuance of a grading permit, and 2, this approval is for the submitted site plan and elevations only.
Second.
All right, so we have a motion. Go ahead.
Farrell,
Yes.
Ballard,
Yes.
Burrell.
Yes. Your motion has been granted. Thank you.
If Tim misses the staff report, we're just going to wait a minute or two for our other member to join us and let the minutes reflect that Barry Clapper has rejoined the board. Thanks. Okay, great. Our next case is CU /V-20-23 Daniel Weddle. Staff report, please.
Scanlon Development Services Manager. We are looking at the property at 917 North Fairview Street. You can see located here just southeast of, middle school. Here you can see that on the right. The property is 0.16 acres. It's currently zoned R3, and there is an existing lawful non-conforming duplex on the property that has been existing there for some time. The property also contains an accessory structure and is in the Maple Heights Historic District. It received a certificate of appropriateness for the work that we will discuss tonight from the Historic Preservation Commission at its July 13th hearing. It also received approval for an accessory dwelling unit that will be built in the northwest corner of the site, and a building permit for that building from the Monroe County Building Department with the planning certificate of zoning compliance as well. As I said, the main structure on the site currently contains 2 units. The petitioner is proposing to add an addition to one of the units in order to provide an additional bedroom as well as a bathroom. But in order to expand a lawful non-conforming duplex, a conditional use approval is required. The petitioner did hold a neighborhood meeting, which is a requirement for duplex in this zoning district. And again, they are requesting conditional use approval for expansion of their existing dwelling duplex, as well as a variance from one of the use-specific standards. So this is the site, obviously, from the street, currently basically reads as a single-family home, but is a duplex. There are 2 units located in the structure. This is an aerial view here. This is where the petitioner would like to do an addition here at the southwest corner of the back of the house. Again, they will be doing an ADU on the western side of the property and already have approvals for that. But because they are creating additional space in the duplex, that is why they need the approval for conditional use. So again, this is a different site plan. It might be maybe a little bit easier to understand. The purple is the addition here against the existing primary structure. So as you know, there's various criteria for conditional use approval, and the department found, as you may recall, that there are various use-specific standards for dwelling duplex in addition to our regular development standards. This petition does meet those with the exception of one for which they are requesting the variance, and that is a request to not have separate utility meters at this site. So I'll speak about that briefly in just a second. The comprehensive plan designates this area as mixed-use residential, which is in many of our older neighborhoods, and suggests that redevelopment, of course, should be compatible with the surroundings that are already there. So this, of course, is continued development of an existing site, but utilizing the existing structure as well. And the department found no issues with the findings related to minimization and mitigation of adverse impacts. Again, a small addition on an existing duplex, and no phasing is proposed. So this is kind of a grainy shot, but this is an aerial, and Mr. Weddle can speak to it better than I can. But basically, this site, this petitioner was able to take advantage of net metering for this site, some things that aren't available for some types of residential houses now. So the type of solar panels and the setup that they have here couldn't be done in the way that it can be done now as far as the benefit to the property owner. Our duplexes require splitting the utilities by unit, and so the petitioner is requesting that because he already has such a large solar installation on the building and was able to take advantage of the net metering at the time when that was available, which is no longer available, asking to request to have a variance from the use-specific standard related to splitting those utilities. So here is the use-specific standard. It's the one at the bottom. It's C4. Each individual dwelling unit shall have separate utility meters. And this was done in an effort to allow for each unit to be sold separately in a condo situation, if that was something that the property owner wanted to do. In this case, this particular owner is not looking to do that and would like to keep the utilities as are, again, as I mentioned, because of the existing solar system. So the department looked at the request and determined no adverse impacts on the community at large or immediate neighbors by allowing the existing solar system to continue and not split into two separate units. We did also include a condition of approval. We are recommending that the board adopt the proposed findings in the report and approving CUV 2023 with two conditions. One, that the conditional use and variance approval is limited to the design shown and discussed in the packet. And number two, that in the event that the petitioner does, for some reason, remove the solar utility installation, that both units of the duplex must have completely separate utility meters. So if the situation on site changes related to the large solar installation, then that specific standard will need to be met. Of the duplex is bolded because I didn't write that in the initial condition, but I wanted to clarify that that's what we're discussing since there is a third unit on this site in the ADU. So that would be our proposed condition. And I can answer any questions.
Thank you. Petitioner? Is there a petitioner here who would like to speak to this? Okay, if you could please state your name.
Daniel Weddle.
Do you swear to or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, you have up to 20 minutes to speak to your case.
I think that pretty well covered it. Yeah, net metering ended December of last year. And that's what we're talking about here. It's the ability to count your solar credits across your bill. It's not really possible to net zero property without it in our region, so that's why I pursued that. So trying to eliminate electrical use on the site.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, any questions? I'm assuming that the property owner lives in one of the units in the duplex currently. Okay, okay. Okay, then we are to the public for comment or input. Do we have anybody on Zoom?
If you want to make a comment on Zoom, please feel free to raise your virtual hand or send a message to Jacqueline Scanlon.
No one? Okay, and there's no one here in chambers. So we are back to the petitioner for any further comments you'd like to add. Okay, then we are to the board for action. I will entertain a motion.
The approval of V-20-23 with the following conditions. Conditional use and variance approval is limited to the design shown and discussed in the packet. And in the event that the petitioner removes the solar utility installation on the site, both units must have completely separate utility meters.
Okay, a second? Second. Okay.
Is it okay to add the phrase "of the duplex" in the second condition? That was not in your packet, but just to clarify that we're not talking about the
Sure.
ADU
Okay,
when we're looking at this in the future.
yes. Okay. Any comments before we vote?
No?
Okay, ready for a vote? Yes.
Ballard. Burrell.
Yes.
Farrell.
Yes.
Okay, the conditional use and variance are approved. Good luck, thank you. Okay. I am once again going to be recusing myself, and Flavia will take over the meeting.
Our next case is case number V-21-23, Community Kitchen of Monroe County. Staff report, please.
Just a sec. All right, this property is located at 1100 West 11th Street, and the petition is V-21-23. You can see located here just northwest of downtown. And the site is a 6,000 square foot, roughly 6,000 square foot, 0.14 acre parcel. and is zoned mixed-use neighborhood scale. The property is developed with a commercial building and parking area that is used by the community kitchen. Properties to the north and west are also of the same zoning district, and properties to the east and south are residential small lot R3 zoned. Surrounding land uses include the Boys and Girls Club building to the north, gas station to the west, and detached single-family to the south and east across both 11th and Monroe Streets. The petitioner is seeking to redevelop the site with a new building and parking area in order to improve their ability to provide meals for those in need from this location. They are proposing a new building. You can see the building that's currently here with the brown roof is kind of awkwardly shaped toward the corner. So the new building is about 1,000 square feet and square with the corner to better utilize this really small parcel for this use. The petitioner needs 3 variances in order to develop the desired configuration. So the variances are variance from driveway location standard to allow vehicular access from 11th Street as opposed to Monroe, minimum parking setback standard, and maximum parking space total standard variance. So this is generally the proposed site design. So you can see the new building is slightly larger and oriented, as I said, again, more in concert with the corner. There's a 15-foot build-to line here, so it has to be built kind of at this corner, and then parking to the west. So for the first variance is access from 11th Street. The reason a variance is needed for that is because access per the code is required to be from the lower classified road. Monroe at this location is a secondary collector, while 11th Street is a primary collector. However, the new configuration will result in that vehicular entrance being more than 50 feet from the intersection. And because the property is only 50 feet deep from north to south, if they used Monroe Street as opposed to 11th, we would not be able to get the 50-foot separation that is also desired and more important for safety probably at this location than using Monroe. Again, that's a product of how shallow this property is. So the second variance is parking setback. So these black lines are rough indications of where the parking setback lines are located. So in this district and in most of our districts, the front parking, so that would be for the east and south lines because there are 2 road frontages, have to be 20 feet behind the front building wall. So if we're looking at this southern building wall and we go roughly 20 feet back, that's this kind of thicker black line here to the south. So all of the parking has to be behind that to the north. But the other 2 lines are the side parking setbacks, which are 8 feet from the north and west line. So this tiny strip in between the black lines is the only real land available for building on this site for parking. So obviously that's not very realistic. It's probably not even the width of a parking space. And there's nothing that can be done to move this building without variance in order to increase that space because of the 15-foot build-to line in this district. So there is no way without a variance to have legal parking on this site. And lastly is the total number of spaces. I think I may have misspoke slightly in the report, and I don't think the ADA space counts against them. So they would be limited to 4 spaces, and they are requesting 5. The petitioner is, the department is supporting, does think that the petition meets the requirements for the variance because of the very shallow nature of the lot. The building could not be much bigger than it is. And as you know, parking is based on, for this type of use, the square footage of the building. So because the building is constricted by the size of the parcel, the parking is also constricted by the size of the parcel. So we are recommending variance approval for that as well. So again, the 3 general regular criteria for development standards variances, which I've discussed briefly, and based on the report and written findings of fact above, The department recommends that the Board of Zoning Appeals adopt the proposed findings and approve, that should say all 3 of the requested variances for V2123 with the following conditions. Site plan approval is required prior to issuance of a grading permit, and that this approval is for the submitted site plan only with the following modifications. And these are our suggestions to you. Additional landscaping density will be required along the western property line adjacent to the parking spaces in order to separate the extra spaces visually more from the property to the west, and that the drive aisle on the north of the parking spaces needs to be as short as possible to allow for vehicular movement, and that if green space can be created, landscaping is required. So I'm going to show you what we mean by that. In this location here at the north end of this circle, they are showing that back out. So if you can imagine pulling into one of these parking spaces and then backing out to leave, going all the way to the property line. That is generally by the department seen as part of the parking lot and would need to meet the setback requirement. They can't do that here, it's not feasible. Or we encourage people to design that way even though it's not a parking space. So we will continue to work with the petitioner, and if there's a possibility of putting in some green space landscaping to separate the parking lot visually again from the property to the north, we will do that. We wrote it in a way that if it's not required, if they physically can't do it and still allow for vehicular movement, then we won't require that. And I can answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you. May we have the petitioner's representative come to the podium, please? Please state your name.
Dawn Gray, Spring Point Architects.
Do you swear to tell the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. You have up to 20 minutes.
Thank you. Again, I'd like to thank the board for considering these variances and staff for the report that we just heard. I don't have anything additional again to say about the report. I think it was pretty clear. I will say the mission of the community kitchen to serve the neighborhood, I think is needed within this neighborhood, and that the challenge of this small site does limit some of the site design aspects of the project. We are willing to work with the city and staff on the points that were mentioned about the backup space in the parking lot and any other, minor things that we need to look at moving forward. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Now we're up to the board. If you have any questions for staff or the petitioner.
Just a quick question for staff. Jackie, did you say that, so the new proposal would be 6 and that would include the ADA spot?
Is for 5 and including the ADA spot.
5 including the ADA.
Yeah, so the way that I wrote in the report, and Eric, you can correct me if I'm wrong, if a parking space has under, I think, 12 spaces, then we don't count your ADA space against your max. So I said that they would only be able to have 3 with the ADA space, but they could have 3 plus an ADA space, so they're really only asking for 1 additional space.
Is that specified on this approval? That it will be
Yes, so in
5,
their
6?
site plan, they're showing 5 spaces and 1 aisle,
Yes.
accessible aisle next to their accessible space.
Okay. Thank you. Any more questions? No? So now we're up to the public for questioning. Anybody from the public in here or on Zoom that would like to ask questions?
Nothing on Zoom.
The petitioner has additional time if you want to speak, or if you're okay, we'll proceed. So now we're at final comments from the board then.
I'll just say I I really appreciate what this group does and the mission behind it, and I think this is going to be a nice little upgrade. And to maximize that, I didn't realize that lot was that small, so job well done on what you guys are going to put together. So.
All right. So I'm ready for a motion.
Okay, I'll move that the Board of Zoning Appeals adopt the proposed findings and approve V-21-23 with the following conditions. Site plan approval is required prior to issuance of a grading permit. And number two, this approval is for the submitted site plan only with the following modifications. A, additional landscape density will be required along the western property line adjacent to the parking spaces. And B, the drive aisle north of the parking spaces must be as short as possible to still allow vehicular movement, and if green space is possible, landscaping is required.
May we have a vote, please?
Ballard.
Yes.
Burrell.
Yes.
Farrell.
Yes.
Motion is granted. Thank you.
Okay, please let the minutes reflect that Barry Clapper has rejoined the board. Our next case is V-22-23, True Storage LLC. Staff report, please.
This property is located at 1701 South Liberty Drive. The petition is V-2223, and you can see the property located here on the west side of town. The property is currently zoned mixed-use medium scale, MM, and is located on the east side of South Liberty Drive. The properties to the east and south are also the same zoning district, and properties west are of our residential high-density multifamily district. Properties to the north are outside of the city's jurisdiction and in the Monroe County Planning jurisdiction. Currently, the property contains the old Coca-Cola distribution center, and you saw a package of variances or a variance or two for this earlier this year. The petitioner will be seeking major site plan approval for a change in use because of how close the property is to Interstate 69. That's required by code to seek major site plan approval. And the plan for the building is that the building will be remodeled to add a second floor, a mezzanine floor with interior storage units on both of the levels that will result, and they will be accessed from interior hallways. So the petitioner is requesting a variance from location and separation of drive standards for their zoning district. The requirement is that no entrance or drive be installed closer to the street than the existing or front building wall. So you can see the building here, and you may recognize this site plan from the last time you saw it. These kind of grayer gray space here is a parking area that exists that will be removed, and this darker gray with the curve is the driveway that is planned to be installed. Again, the code requires that no entrance or drive be installed closer to a street than the existing or proposed front building wall, running less than 45 degrees from parallel to the street right-of-way. So obviously this is completely parallel to the street right-of-way. Again, these are the parking areas that are changing, which you've seen previously, and then this driveway will be the result. And this is the driveway we're discussing tonight, and this is where Liberty Drive is located here in the rectangle. The proposed drive location is approximately 225 feet from the property line adjacent to the right-of-way. So obviously the code requirement is written with probably smaller, more city-sized properties in mind, and not wanting to have parking or drive aisles in between buildings and the road. One, that can create confusion for drivers, and two, it is also usually more detrimental for pedestrians trying to access buildings. In this case, that's not really what we have here, obviously, because the building is so far from the road that will not have the general negative effects that we sometimes see. So again, our 3 development standards findings that we typically have. The department found that granting the variance will not be injurious to public health, safety, morals, and general welfare. Again, largely because the building on the property is so far from the right-of-way, 225 feet, and that there is already some parking there that is going to be removed, so we think that that's an improvement. And that will be also, again, removing excess asphalt to reduce total impervious surface coverage. And the department found that the strict application of the terms of the ordinance does result in practical difficulties in the use of the property, largely because of the existing layout and size of the property, and additionally because the area to the east of the building, which could possibly be used for a driveway to have it be switched and be on the east side of the building, is very steep. And so the benefits of having them meet code and go on the east side are not substantial, and we could run into issues over there as well with slope or environmental considerations. So based on the report and written findings of fact, the department recommends that the Board of Zoning Appeals adopt the proposed findings and approve the requested variances for V2223 with the following conditions. The variance for the driveway is approved for the location shown on the plans and cannot be moved closer to the right-of-way, and that 11 large trees shall be planted along the length of the driveway that runs north and south at a separation of approximately 20 feet between trees. So we felt that having, again, some sort of visual separation for, if someone's using that driveway at night and having car lights and things, to have it be delineated that is happening on the property, and that would help with that issue. And I can answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you. The petitioner's representative, if you could step to the podium, please. Please state your name.
Andy Knust,
you-
civil engineer with Bledsoe Riggert Cooper James.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, you have up to 20 minutes.
Thank you. Yeah, you've heard from this case before, and there was just another variance we discovered that we needed to come back and ask you about. So this parallel driveway it's needed for the site plan for this proposed use of this site to be successful, so that patrons of the True Storage facility can access the north side of the building where a loading bay is proposed. And it's standard within the storage business that storage units should be accessible to users within, a walking distance of 150 feet. And if we only have access to those interior storage units from the south side of the building, there will be quite a number of a pretty large percentage of the building won't be, accessible from an entrance at 150 feet. So the north loading bay is really needed for the site plan, the business proposed use to be successful. So we thought that using that existing driveway that extends, it runs almost the entire length of the front side of the building there. We thought it would be the best use of resources to use that existing drive, repave it and extend it to access the north side of the building. And we'd like Jackie mentioned, we'd remove the parking spaces that are there, and it would really just be an access drive. So we did look at angling the drive to be at 45 degrees so that it would comply with the UDO standards, but that's just really not a very good solution. It would actually make the drive substantially longer and would require us to remove more of the existing trees on the site, and it would really, that driveway would land right near the entrance to the facility, like right where you turn in from Liberty Drive, and that would just cause a lot of problems with the safety problems with patrons entering and exiting the facility, and just problems with vehicle turning movements to access the north side of the facility. So we just felt that that wasn't really an acceptable solution. So we're here asking for the variance on the parallel driveway, and if you have any further questions about it, I'd be happy to answer. One thing I might note is that the condition about the 11 large trees, we can certainly do that. We might just ask for a little bit of flexibility about the spacing between the trees, because there are 4 trees existing on the site within, along that current driveway that we'd like to keep there. And so, we can put 11 trees in there, but we might, adjust a little bit the spacing between them to accommodate the existing trees that are on the site. But we would certainly, be able to accomplish some good screening from Liberty Drive, which I believe is the goal.
Thank you. Thank you. We are to the board for any questions. Any questions?
My question is for staff about the 11 trees. Does it make any difference, the spacing and location?
No, I mean, we base the spacing on spacing from the UDO as 20 foot as a minimum. And I think if you wanted to amend it to say, a total of 11 trees, including those that are there, that would be fine. We basically looked at the length, distance, and then picked the number of trees and the spacing based on what the UDO requirement would be for street trees. So yeah, changing that in some way we'd be amenable to that for sure.
Any other questions? Okay, we are to the public for comment. Is there anybody in chambers or online who would like to comment on this petition? This is your chance.
Nothing on Zoom.
Okay, and nobody here, so we are back to the petitioner. If you have any final comments? Okay. Okay, then we are to the board for action. I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the requested variance for V-22-23 with the following conditions. The variance for the driveway is approved for the location shown on the plans and cannot be moved closer to the right-of-way. 11 large trees, including, how do we want to say that? Including existing trees shall be planted along the length of the driveway that runs north-south at the separation of approximately 20 feet between trees. I don't know if you want to be more specific about, is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Well, because when you say 20 feet, then.
I think you could say at a minimum 20 feet.
Okay, at a minimum of 20 feet between trees. Okay, does that make sense? Understand?
Yeah, yep.
Okay.
Any discussion? Oh, second, I need a second? Okay, okay, any discussion? Ready to vote?
Yes.
Yes. Clapper.
Yes.
Ballard.
Okay, the variance is granted. Thank you. Good luck. Okay, we are on to our last case of the evening. It is V-24-23, David Hayes. Staff report, please.
Thank you. So this is a request for David Hayes for a property at 300 East 6th Street. The petitioner is here tonight to request a variance from the use-specific standards in order to allow ground floor dwelling units within 20 feet of the first floor facade of a building. So this property is at the northwest corner of 6th and Morton, and has been developed with 2 buildings. There is a mixed-use building on the front of the property, that has commercial uses and some apartments in it. And then in 2019, there was a building constructed on the north side of the site that contains 16 residences. So the ground floor of the building now currently contains 2 dwelling units in it. And the petitioner would like to finish off a portion of the building along the east side to construct 2 new dwelling units. So these would be accessed from inside the building, from an interior hallway on the north side of the site. And these would contain 2 residences. So the Unified Development Ordinance does not allow for ground floor dwelling units to be within 20 feet of the facade of the building along a front. So because this property has 2 frontages along 6th Street and Morton Street, that 20-foot setback requirement would apply to both frontages. So the petitioner has to request a variance in order to allow for these 2 dwelling units to be constructed. So this space is currently commercial space. The petitioner has applied for a building permit to remodel the southern portion of this site, southern portion of the building, that is, for a new dentist office that is currently being reviewed. And they are requesting to refinish some of that commercial space to allow for these 2 new dwelling units to be installed. So as the board is aware, there are 3 criteria that we need to make findings for. So in this regard, for the granting of the variance to allow for the dwelling unit, we do not find that there will be any injuries to the public health, safety, moral welfare. Again, the granting of this variance would not impact the overall safety and the design of the building. So we do not find any injuries to the public health, safety, moral, or general welfare as part of this aspect of it. However, we do find that there are adverse impacts to the overall community as a whole. As the board is aware, with several petitions that have pursued this aspect, the desire of the UDO in the prohibition of the ground floor units is to have active non-residential spaces along the portions of a building immediately adjacent to a sidewalk and pedestrian area. So the location of a residence immediately adjacent to the sidewalk does not provide the desired pedestrian experience within the downtown that is desired by the UDO and the comprehensive plan. So we do find that there would be a negative impact on the use and value adjacent to the area if the variance was granted. And finally, the strict application of the terms of the zoning code would result in practical difficulties in the use of the property. We do not find that this petition meets that criteria. Ground floor dwelling units are not a requirement. As the board knows, the granting of a variance is to relieve a difficulty from a requirement from the zoning code on a property. The zoning code does not require ground floor dwelling units here. There is ample space within the building if the petitioner wanted to install dwelling units, which they have. They have installed 2 ground floor dwelling units within the building that meets these setback requirements. So we do not find that the denial of the variance would create practical difficulties in the use of the property. So as I mentioned, there is space within the building that the residence could be constructed and added without the need for a variance. So while we may have differences of opinions of whether or not we agree with the legislation, that is obviously not the role of the Board of Zoning Appeals. They are to find that there is something unique that doesn't allow you to meet code here. So as I mentioned in that regard, we do not find that there is a practical difficulty here that is peculiar to the property that would say that the variance has to be granted in order for the property to be allowed in a reasonable manner. Commercial uses can occur on the ground floor. The ground floor of this building has had commercial use in it for its entirety. So there's certainly not an argument there that prohibiting the ground floor units prohibits the use of the building. So with that, we do recommend that the Board of Zoning Appeals adopt the proposed findings and deny this variance request, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Eric. Okay, we're ready to hear from the petitioner's representative.
Good evening. I'm Doug Bruce with Tabor Bruce Architects.
I've got to swear you in. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, you have 20 minutes.
All right, thank you. I believe the petitioner, a family member, partner, is also here to speak after me. A few things, and I had some notes, but I want to address something that Eric just mentioned right off the bat. This building, over its history, of course, has had commercial uses on the ground floor. It's a very much a very old historic building of limestone walls, not easily something that we want to cut new openings in. So we find that kind of particular. This is not a new building, and this is not some wood frame structure that we can just plop openings in very easily. I would also say that the main entrance to this building, where it had its entrance to the commercial space, is at the corner of 6th and Morton. And at that space, you have a corner entry. It's been the only commercial entry for this building. And at that point, the sidewalk is 27 feet wide. So it's almost like a plaza there. And I think Jerry Hayes will speak a little bit on some of the uses of the building, but it's been empty for a few years, and we finally have a tenant that moved in and is using that commercial entry. What I wanted to talk about is in 2019, under the UDO, there was an addition built which used to be the parking lot to the back of this building, and that addition has residential uses on a few stories, and they are right up against the sidewalk. And the plan at that time was to create a courtyard, which it does, that is fenced off because, as you could imagine, you need some safety and security in this area. So they have a landscaped courtyard with a fence that allows access to those units that they planned in 2019, as well as an entry to the door on the north of this that residents could gain access to. And there was a unit built at that time. And the plan is to finish out a couple of more of these units, but not exceeding the 50% requirement to put a couple more units in. So now if we go to a commercial unit in that space, then we lose the privacy for the people that are in the building to the north of this. So that was 2019 when that was planned. 2023, as we look at this now, I would say another part of this site that is unique is along Morton Street, where the city would like in the UDO to have us place commercial uses. We have a 6-foot wide sidewalk with parking meters in it and angled parking right up on the sidewalk and bumpers hanging over the sidewalk. So we don't have a real accessible area, and we don't have a sidewalk in that area that's like the 27-foot sidewalk that you find at the main entry or on some of the other places, the other sites around this. I think 6th Street over by Yonkos has a tree plot. 6th Street has, and even across the street has a tree plot. We don't have a tree plot here. We have cars right up against the building. So we're one of the few spaces right in this area, again, unique, that's just not set up for commercial interaction. And furthermore, we have a historic building that isn't just easily something that we can open up the walls and make it visible for commercial use. And then finally, I wanted to mention that, even this month, and I know this is under the current UDO, but the Plan Commission is looking at the UDO and proposing to reduce the commercial requirement from 50% to 30% for ground floor. We're at 50% now. In a town where we're talking and clamoring, and as I heard mentioned earlier, wanting more housing. This is 2 one-bedroom units on a ground floor, so these aren't going to be expensive units by any means. So even in the MD district, where we have in this area a lot of vacant ground floor spaces, I think we can all realize post-COVID, that's an issue that we have to fight, we have to address. We don't have as many people in offices anymore, but we have a housing need, and even maybe more so than we had before COVID. With that, I'll let Jerry Hayes speak. Thank you.
If you could please state your name.
Jerry Hayes.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, thanks.
So I'd like to tell you a little bit about my family's history with this property. My grandfather started a grocery store in Smithville, Indiana in the early 40s. He made sandwiches and delivered them to the quarry workers and sold them. That's how he made his money. In about 1945, between 45 and 48, he moved this grocery store to this site. It was called Hayes Market. It was an empty building at the time. Excuse me. It was a family operation with his two of his children, Paul, a son, and a daughter, Mary, working there. And my grandfather operated that grocery store until his death in 1973. Paul and Mary took over and operated that store until Paul's death in 1996, at which time the store was closed and the building was sold to a third party. Around 2000, my son David bought the building back to get it back in the family. When the property was built on the north side of this site that Doug mentioned, David commissioned a local artist, Adam Long, to paint a mural on the B-side line of the Hayes Market building, depicting the transition of the block from the era when the store was in business to the present day. It's pretty cool. If you haven't ever seen it, you need to take a look at it. David's been very careful to preserve the integrity of the building and the family legacy it represents. With more and more people, as Doug said, with more and more people working from home and staffing shortages making it more difficult for retail stores to open new brick and mortar businesses, it's becoming increasingly difficult to find tenants for non-residential space. I'd ask that you grant this variance to keep the Hayes Market building financially viable. Thank you.
Thank you. We,
Sorry, David Hayes is on.
okay.
Online. He may want to comment as well.
Okay. Mr. Hayes, could you please state your name?
David Hayes.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay. You guys have about 13 minutes remaining.
That's okay. I mean, listening to my dad talk honestly got me very emotional. So I apologize, but he's absolutely right. That when I met with Mayor Hamilton in 2018, and I said, "What do you think I should do with this spot?" He said, "I want you to make it great." And I said, "I want it to be great too, but I don't want to build on top of it. I want to keep it just as it is." And he admired that. And then we built on the parking lot, and we did that. And at the time, I was on the board of CASA. I was on the board of CASA for 13 years, and I had them in the bottom floor. And during COVID, I said, guys, it's kind of silly that we're here. Let's find something a little more affordable. So we did. And at that expense, I let that space go dark for 12 months, nearly 12 months. And but I never wanted to change the integrity of that building, never, one time. And I haven't, and I won't. And as Doug Bruce said, you can't allow someone to walk through that gate, double key fob to get into that beautiful little courtyard that we made. I want it to be like a Melrose Place for you older people that know what I'm talking about. I want it to be a great place for people to congregate and to enjoy. And I've met some parents bringing their kids there, and they love the fact that it's locally owned. They love the history behind it, and we just can't allow it. So I'm not going to do it. I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to cut a hole in that building. I'm not going to do it. So I just want to ask you guys to, in your heart, to understand that this building has a big meaning to Bloomington. And, we've been in this area for 5 generations, and we love this community. We love its people. We want it to be great. And you know what? I mean, it is what it is. So I don't know what else to say. Dad, thank you very much. Because listening to you talk make me, thanks, Dad. Appreciate you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, we are to the board for questions. Anybody have any?
Yeah, this is for the petitioner. Can you guys clarify, so you're stating that even if you added these 2 units, that you're still going to be at 50%, less than 50% of total existing? How much total existing commercial is there right now? Do you know that?
Yeah, we met the UDO requirement of 50% commercial. We've got a dentist that came in and took all the space that he needed, and we worked with him to make sure that after he took his space, he has just 51% of the space. So that leaves us with the 49, that there's another unit, there's 2 other units on the back side of this building that face the courtyard. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Has anything other than residential been considered to put in this space, other than, commercial or residential? Like, I know previously we've chatted about amenity spaces and things like that.
Is that a question for the petitioner?
Sorry.
Yeah.
David, I think that's probably a question for David to answer.
David, are you
Sure,
still
thank
with
you.
us?
So, I mean, the answer is no. We haven't really considered anything else. I mean, when we, that bottom floor, I don't know what you would do with that other than just have it's just 2 1-bedroom units. I mean, there's already 2 1-bedrooms in there, or 2-bedroom unit. There's 2 shells there waiting to be built out, which we had fully intended to do until we found out about the UDO, which we had no idea about. We built the Q Tower, which is named after my wife because I call her the Queen. So that's named after her. And there's bottom floor units there as well. I don't know what you would do with it besides let people live there. I have no idea. I mean, they're small. They're they're affordable. I don't know for sure exactly the numbers, but when you look at the Q Tower, the same footprint on the top, yeah, on the far right-hand side there. Well, you can't really see it there actually, but that's an old picture. Yeah, those are old pictures. That's during that's old. Yeah, those are really old. It doesn't look like that at all. It's all beautiful now. It has beautiful black trim around the windows. We power washed the outside, got the graffiti off of it, did everything we could to make it beautiful. But the top floor leases for substantially more than the bottom floor does. The bottom floor units, as Eric mentioned to me one night, they're just less desirable, but that's okay because some people need that. They need something more affordable and they want to be downtown. There's nothing else you can do with that spot besides let people stay there. So that's a long-winded answer to your question. I apologize, but no, there's not been any additional consideration on, putting a gym in there or whatever it might be.
Jackie Scanlon, Development Services Manager, and Eric can correct me if I'm wrong. When the Q Tower was built, there was a site plan done for both buildings. And that might be what Eric's putting up here, I'm not sure. There was a site plan done for both buildings, and this area was shown as commercial. That was the plan at that time.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry, Mr. Hayes, you can't just start talking. Oh, sorry to mute him.
Mr. Hayes, we have to ask you a direct question for you and to be able to speak at this time. You will have an opportunity to comment again later.
So there was commercial plan for this building, and it is, a historically commercial storefront. And then work was done and started in the building without permits, and they started doing interior remodel. So Mr. Grulich very kindly worked with them to allow for the unit that they have that doesn't have frontage to be able to be built out and occupied because they had already rented it. And these units, we said we can't do that because it doesn't meet code, and talked about having to do this process. I don't think that's probably any fault of the owner other than just not knowing what was going on with their contractor. There's like a long protracted story about that. But I do want to make it clear that there was a site plan approved for this location when they built the second building. I mean, they built the building in the back, and at that time, it was not requested or discussed that these would need to be residential in order to be viable. And then at some time after that, they decided that needed to happen. And as they've mentioned, and Eric is showing here, they have leased 51% of this building to a non-commercial use, which is great. That's one of our regulations. Had they leased the site with frontage on our roads, that would have met our second regulation, which is the one that they're requesting the variance for. And that was previously commercial, as he mentioned, the CASA offices were there. So maybe there's a compelling reason why that couldn't have been done. I know that that's not what they chose to do, or maybe the doctor didn't want to have the front, there could be lots of reasons, but they're not the same regulation, so 51% is great and meets that requirement, but they also have to have frontage as commercial. Just to kind of clarify, because it gets a little...
Yeah. Could you maybe talk a little bit more about, because I know we've had discussions of that are similar. This has come up again and again, and we know that there has been further thinking about potentially changing those percentages. Has there been any further thinking on the frontage aspect, or is that still, the goal of that still really remains in place, and that pedestrian-oriented frontage is still very important?
Our current draft that we presented to Plan Commission last month, and we'll discuss more, or this month, and we'll discuss more next month. No, there's no change to having that commercial be located on the road. And for the reasons you kind of hinted at, that's where the pedestrian interface is, and having the space inside of the building be public, or at least not someone's residence. It typically provides for a more comfortable interface, or also, use for that building for members of the public who are outside of the building, especially in this building where they have the kind of, I don't know if I'm going to say the right word, colonnade, or they have the columns and you can walk under. You can imagine if those are residences, whose space is that? How does that, are people still going to be walking through there? They're going to be, chairs outside and things like that. It's just an oddly designed, I would say the department thinks oddly designed, it's a wonderful historic building and maybe not designed for those, store frontage, large windows to be into a residence. And UDO doesn't call for that either. So it's a hard one for sure, just from the, that they do have a non-residential use in here. It's just unfortunate that they're not meeting both requirements with that. And as Mr. Grulich had pointed out, there doesn't seem to be a compelling reason with the site that they couldn't make this commercial. We know that it most recently, it's not residential. It hasn't been residential. They're asking to switch it to that. Thank you.
Okay, I have a question for the petitioner's representative. I fully understand the historic, and I love this building. It's a beautiful building. The access point that is off the street currently, I know there's a stair that goes up, I guess, to a unit that's right above. Wouldn't it be possible, I'm not sure, maybe there would need to be some reconfiguration, but couldn't there be and sort of that be a little vestibule that would allow access to this smaller commercial space so that somebody wouldn't have to enter in through the courtyard? Did that make sense, my question?
I mean, that's a good question. Like I said, you can see there that we just, I think was brought up, the colonnade, where I kind of work this facade here. Where the columns are there, that is commercial, and it's wider there. And then if you go a little further to the right, okay, so that area is where there's just not a lot of width of sidewalk there. No, you're not going to set a sandwich board out front. There's the door that goes upstairs, so I suppose you'd have to look at, and again, I wasn't part of that project, what you could do upstairs. So, there's a potential that you could enter in this door, I suppose, and have a door to the left or a door to the right to gain access to it. It's not the most desirable. I mean, it's not much of a storefront, and it's already in an area that, like I said, I think if you zoom out, you can see we have the smallest sidewalk right there. That's the part where we don't have commercial and where the dentist wasn't wanting to take. You can see that, I mean, this building was built with the main entry for commercial on that corner, and that's why you have so much space there. So, but I, again, answering your question, I suppose you could come in and have a lobby there. You're still going to have the stairs going up, so you'd have to deal with privacy or security upstairs. And I know, you can't have a door right at the top of the stairs, so now you're going to take space out up there. So, is that something that can be configured? I don't know. But the thought of at least downstairs, possibly.
Any other questions? Okay, if there are no other questions at this time from the board, we will go to the public. If, sir, would you like to step to the podium, please? And if you could state your name.
Ray Cook.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Ray Cook.
Could you please, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
You have 5 minutes.
Bloomington seems to say that they want people to live downtown, spend their money downtown, work downtown, but then they make it so difficult to do that. We have a property here that really does not have any true pedestrian thoroughfare except for one day a week, that's Saturday. That is the market. Allowing residences there doesn't change the view, the business structure of Bloomington. So Bloomington needs to make a decision whether they want people to live downtown and make it accessible for people to live downtown or not. We have a lot of vacancies in commercial property in Bloomington. Again, so I mean, it goes back to, do we want people to live downtown and make it easy for them to do that, or make it difficult for them to do that? You know, the Hayes have been in this community for a long, long time. They want beauty. They want good things for this community. They would never do anything to harm this community. And, you know, I just ask for you guys to consider that, you know, because you guys have the ultimate decision on this. And the Hayes have been here a long time. They want beauty in Bloomington. It's up to you to make that decision. So, thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Is there anybody else in the public who would like to address this petition? Okay, anybody online?
No one online.
Okay, so then we are back to the petitioner or any of the petitioner's representatives who would like to make final comments.
David Hayes would also like to speak too.
Okay, how much time remaining do they have?
Sorry, 11 minutes and 22 seconds.
Okay, thank you.
First, or, oh, I'm going, okay. I'd just like to address the findings of fact. The second criteria, I think the first criteria the staff had no problem with. The second criteria, the use and value of the area adjacent to the property will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner. And it starts out by saying, the comment starts out by saying, while no direct adverse impacts to the use and value of the surrounding properties as a result of requested variance are found, it goes on to say it does detract from the overall pedestrian experience. And as was stated earlier, there's not a lot of foot traffic on Morton Street except during farmers market. And even if there were, I'd be interested to know how many people would find that to be an adverse experience. That's a very subjective statement to make. And finally, the third proposed finding, the strict application of the terms of the Unified Development Ordinance will result in practical difficulties in the use of property, that the practical difficulties are peculiar to the property in question, and that the development standards variance will relieve that. Well, in this case, I believe there are circumstances peculiar to the property in question because of the historical value of the property. So that's really all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. David, did you want to comment?
Let me just say about the entrance there on the street, that the stairs go directly up and into all residential. So all the entire upstairs is all residential. It goes right when you walk up, it goes into a 2-bedroom with 2 young ladies live there, and then down a hallway, and it's all residential. And they're like Doug said, he wasn't part of the design of that project, but I do not see any practical way you could secure the residential piece of that and also have any room at all at that bottom landing to cut anything in to go into those areas. But I think my dad nailed it. you know, that's all I have to say. Thank you guys. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Keep turning this off. For further questions or if anybody's ready to make a motion. Anybody want to take a stab?
I just have a quick question for staff. So I remember because I was part of the approval of the adjacent building. So the building in question that we're talking about has been always a commercial building. Did they apply for a residential transformation of this building?
No, we have not, we did not approve or receive any permits to allow for any remodeling for residential within this.
Are you referring to the top floor? Or
Yeah, this existing building.
So do you want to talk about the project where they remodeled and added the building?
Didn't they get a building permit to do that unit that's in like the middle?
Yep, so there was, so we did approve a building permit to allow for this interior unit. Let me see if I can circle that here so that it's a little bit more clear. So this area here, they did apply for a permit and we approved that to allow for the residential unit within the inside of the building because we said we could not approve the units on the outside because they did not meet the standard for the 20-foot setback from the front facade. And so, you know, we had several discussions with them, you know, where I pointed out, you know, that there is ample room within the building that they could add units that would meet the 20-foot setback from the requirement, from the facade requirement. So yes, we did approve one permit for the interior unit.
So they started work on all the units, these 3 units, and we realized they were working, contacted the Monroe County Building Department, said, do you have a building permit? They didn't have one. Stop work order. I met with Mr. Hayes, and then Eric was able to work with them because we were able to permit this. So then Eric did the review of this 3rd unit and was able to release that certificate of zoning compliance so they could continue on that unit. But then the outcome was, hey, you have to stop on these other units because of this, because you can't have them in this location without a variance.
Yeah, I was just trying to understand the timeline here and how this is all working out. Thank you.
Okay, so if anybody doesn't have any other questions, we're going to need to make a motion, somebody, and then we can discuss. Okay, I will move denial of case V-25-23 based on the findings in the staff report. Do we have a second? Okay, so we can discuss. The reason that I made the motion is because I do think this is a beautiful, historic commercial building. And while I understand the need, the desperate need for more housing options and more units, I also am sensitive to the UDO and this private-public zone where I believe that it is quite uncomfortable to be up against residential units in such a close proximity. This is a relatively well-trafficked area. I don't know exactly in front of this building, but it is part of the downtown, sort of the heart and core of our community. And in looking at the findings, that last finding, which talks about practical difficulties, I do not see that this the building and how it is situated and what has been brought to us today actually rises to the level of a variance. I don't think that there is enough of a uniqueness of the quality of, in the argument. I am, again, I understand not wanting to change the facade, and I greatly respect that. But I do think that there are probably some ways that this could be thought of maybe a bit differently. It might take some, further reworking of what might happen, what's happening upstairs. I'm not sure, because I'm not familiar, of course, and we don't have any of that information. I know that this has been a sensitive topic, and it's being reconsidered, what the right balance is for our first floor properties in the downtown area. But we don't make that policy, and I am not, our purview tonight is to really look at what the findings have been put in front of us and to make a judgment as to whether or not that meets the threshold for a variance. And so, in my opinion, it does not, and that is why I have put forward the motion as I have. And until that changes, and it sounds like it is changing, but it does not sound like the relationship between these commercial properties and the street, that relationship still seems to be held as important and valuable and something that we're holding in balance with the need for more units.
I'll just speak to, I really appreciate the petitioners, the presentation. You can tell, the passion behind and what this building means to your family and the legacy, to the public as well. I think they raise good points, and I think this is an ongoing discussion as part of the Planning Commission as well. I can tell you, we're in our second round of discussions at the meeting next month. You're more than welcome to join us there, because I think things are trending a different direction in commercial properties, commercial real estate. I think in terms of ground floor, residential ground floor purposing, I do believe that's going to be in the future more and more. I think it's going to be a requirement because of the changes in the way property is being used post-COVID. But I wish it were as simple as, do we want people downtown or not? And I understand the point you made there. I think the answer to that, being on both commissions, is yes, we do want people downtown, but yes, we also want vibrant retail to continue, and that's a delicate balance right now. That's part of the reason I think it's being discussed as taking it from 50% to an even lower number. If that dialogue kind of continues, and I think is backed by, facts and data, I do personally will be supporting changes, more changes for less required commercial space because of the changing in the market, and that affects everybody. And I think everybody wants a vibrant downtown, but there's a risk that comes with that as well for developers and owners of downtown buildings. So if that were to change down the road, I think we're having a different discussion with this, but the changes haven't been made yet. And as you mentioned, the purview of the zoning appeals is very narrow. We have to deal with, the facts as presented, and we're voting on things as they are, not as potentially what they could be. So this is a tough one. You guys raised some really good points, but I think we're limited in what we can do.
We have a motion for denial and a second, so we'll have a vote.
Yes.
Clapper.
Yes.
Ballard.
No.
Burrell.
Yes.
Okay. The petition is denied, and we are concluded. Thank you.